and pro-Trump comments to him. Trace is on the case for us tonight from the LA newsroom. Hey, Trace.
Good evening, Shannon. When the story first broke and Jussie Smollett claimed he was attacked, there was no corroborating evidence, but that did not stop or even slow down the rush to judgment. 2020 Democratic presidential candidates weighed in immediately. Senators Cory Booker and Kamala Harris both called it, quote, an attempted modern-day lynching. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand said, quote, we are all responsible for condemning this behavior and every person who enables or normalizes it. And freshman Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeted, quote, this attack was not possibly homophobic. It was a racist and homophobic attack. And despite being caught red-handed in more than one rush to judgment in recent weeks, the media also had no problem declaring it a hate crime. The New York Times, quote, Jussie Smollett, one of the stars of the television show Empire, was attacked in Chicago by two assailants who yelled racial and homophobic slurs. American Urban Radio Network's White House reporter April Ryan tweeted, quote, this attack on Jussie Smollett is a hate crime and should be treated as such. GQ magazine added, quote, the racist, homophobic attack on Jussie Smollett is far-right America's endgame. Now there are reports saying that when the actor received a racist letter back in January and it did not draw a bigger reaction, he went out and paid two brothers $3,500 to rehearse, then stage the attack. One brother held the rope and poured the bleach. The other wore a red hat, yelled slurs, and said this was MAGA country. And in light of this investigative 180, the 2020 presidential candidates who commented before there was evidence now want to hear all the evidence. Watch.
There should be an investigation, and I think that once the investigation is concluded, then we can all comment. But I'm not going to comment until I know the outcome of the investigation.
Well, the information is still coming out. I'm going to withhold until all the information actually comes out.
Meantime, Smollett's attorneys have vowed to keep an active dialogue with Chicago police, but a few hours ago, Chicago police told us they had not heard from Smollett or his lawyers. Shannon.
Okay, we will stand by. Trace Gallagher, thank you very much. Let's discuss this whole situation tonight with our power panel. Rochelle Ritchie, former press secretary for the Democratic Policy and Communications Committee. Charlie Kirk, executive director, Turning Point USA. And Buck Sexton, a former NYPD analyst and now contributor to TheHill.com. Welcome to all of you.
Good to see you.
Hi, Shannon. Okay, so, Buck, you were one of the first folks out there asking questions about this. You took a ton of heat about it. How are those folks who came after you responding now?
I haven't gotten any apologies yet, Shannon, which is not surprising at all, but I think it tells us a lot about the media attitude here, which is that they're not going to learn. They're not going to learn the lesson. This was obviously a flawed story from the start. I know this because I came out and said that this is a flawed story. The moment that we were hearing things like he wouldn't turn over phone records, that he turned over redacted phone records, just the very line, this is MAGA country. This is something that somebody who doesn't know any Trump supporters would think that Trump supporters during an attack like this would say. It just didn't add up. And I'm not saying the press had to say that he was a liar from the get-go. Of course, it's an allegation. It's very serious. But words like alleged, words like reported, and then following up to get evidence and facts, that's what the media is supposed to do. But as we know, they are activists. They are not journalists. And they will learn nothing from, once again, just like in Cummington, being dead wrong.
All right, Buck, you mentioned this caricature of the persons that he said attacked him. This is what they say on nationalreview.com. The headline is, hate crime hoaxes reflect America's sickness. They say anyone not blinded by bias or panic should have been skeptical of Smollett's story from the beginning. He openly harbors an intense hatred for Donald Trump and his supporters, going so far as comparing them to Klansmen. That his alleged attackers perfectly fit this description should have raised eyebrows across the political spectrum. The cartoony screenplay villain portrayal of white Trump supporters was outrageously comical. Rochelle, your response to that?
Well, you know, when I first heard the story and the allegations that, you know, Jussie Smollett had alleged happened to him, you know, I supported him. I believed him. And the reason why I believed him, and I think a lot of other people like me believed him, is because it is conceivable to think that something like this could happen, unfortunately, in our country, considering how heightened racism and racist rhetoric is right now. But once the evidence sort of came out about the two brothers and him not turning over phone records, I started to look at this and I said, you know, this doesn't seem quite right. And then I said, you know, this is a slap in the face to anyone that has or will unfortunately be a victim of a hate crime. And it gives credence to this idea that when black Americans or gay Americans say that they're being targeted by racists in this country, it gives credence for people not to believe us. So what Jesse has done has really been a disservice to anyone that has been a victim of a hate crime. And unfortunately, I cannot stand behind him on that.
Yeah, and we're still waiting to hear officially from the Chicago Police Department what they publicly want to say about so much of what is trickling out. So we're waiting for that official comment from them. Charlie, I want to read you something that was written by the executive assistant to the Washington Post editorial board. She says this: if Smollett's story is found to be untrue, it will cause irreparable damage to the communities most affected, as Rochelle said. The incident would be touted as proof that there's a leftist conspiracy to cast Trump supporters as violent, murderous, racist. It would be the very embodiment of, quote, fake news. And that reason more than any other is why I need this story to be true, despite its ugliness and despite what it would say about the danger of the world I live in. Charlie?
Yeah, there was a great point made earlier, which is there are real hate crimes in America, and this does a disservice to people that experience those hate crimes when they're manufactured, when they're planned, when you pay people to allegedly pay people to try to participate in them. This is what I call lottery ticket journalism, and this has been happening we have 3 examples of this over the last month where journalists essentially just scratch off a lottery ticket hoping it to be true. We saw this with the Covington High School kids. We saw this with the Michael Cohen story, where Mueller actually had to come out and debunk the BuzzFeed story. Whatever happened to that, by the way? That disappeared really quickly. We saw this during the Kavanaugh hearings back in October. And unfortunately, this rush to judgment is creating an atmosphere where people want things to be true because it will fit their political narrative. And I hope we have not fallen that far as a country, but the hatred for Donald Trump is so great that the media class is clamoring to find these instances to confirm a narrative that they believe to be true, which is the antithesis of what journalism is supposed to be.
Well, again, new information trickling out this week, and a lot of it still unconfirmed by Chicago police. We await to hear if there'll be another interview and what follows from that. In the meantime, Charlie, Buck, and Rochelle, thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, this is a Fox News alert. 16 states led by California are going to the Ninth Circuit. A court known for smacking down the president's plans. Tonight, they're requesting that a federal judge block the president's use of a national emergency in order to direct money to the border wall. Kristen Fisher is tracking it all, joins us now with the very latest. Hey, Kristen.
Hey, Shannon. Well, this type of lawsuit, it's really exactly what President Trump predicted when he declared a national emergency earlier this week. It was filed in federal district court in San Francisco on the same day as hundreds of protests nationwide. The states argue the declaration is unconstitutional. They also argue that diverting these funds to build a border wall will hurt their economies, their counter-drug efforts, wildlife, and their military bases.
The president targeted a lot of military dollars, military construction dollars. Much of that money goes, for example, to the Army Corps of Engineers, which helps, quite honestly, a lot of states when they're in mode of helping folks who suffered from natural disasters. There's also military money that goes to installations, military installations, where our men and women in uniform and their families reside. Taking that away hurts California families that are in the military.
Now, White House officials have said that they're confident that they can move this money around without hurting the military. But, Shannon, clearly not everybody agrees with that assessment.
Okay. The president also today making headlines. He was down in Miami giving a very important speech on Venezuela.
Yes, he was. And, you know, right now, so much of Venezuela's future really hinges on what the country's military is going to do. So far, few generals have been willing to turn against Venezuela's socialist president, Nicolas Maduro. But President Trump tried to change that today by issuing this dire warning to members of the Venezuelan military who remain loyal to Maduro.
If you choose this path, you will find no safe harbor, no easy exit, and no way out. You will lose everything. They are risking their future. They are risking their lives and Venezuela's future for a man controlled by the Cuban military and protected by a private army of Cuban soldiers.
Speaking to a cheering crowd of Venezuelan and Cuban immigrants in Miami, President Trump said the United States stands with the Venezuelan people and its interim president, Juan Guaido.
We seek a peaceful transition of power, but all options are open.
Maduro responded by saying, "Who is the commander of the armed forces? Donald Trump from Miami? They think they're the owners of the country?" While Guaido thanked President Trump for his determination and clear leadership.
Crippling shortages of food and medicine plague the country. Socialism has so completely ravaged this great country that even the world's largest reserves of oil are no longer enough to keep the lights on. This will never happen to us.
Speaking in the key swing state of Florida, President Trump did not directly link it.
For Venezuela, Guaido is going to try to get all of that U.S. aid across the border from Colombia. But the big question is, will Maduro and the military try to stop him, Shannon?
Yeah, Saturday is a big day for watching what happens next in this conflict. Thank you, Kristen.
Thanks.
All right, breaking news on Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein has fired former FBI official Andrew McCabe, doubles down, saying Rosenstein was the one floating plans to force the president out of office. Plus, new reaction to allegations that Rosenstein said he'd wear a wire in the White House.
It is alarming that there were apparently folks at the highest levels of our government considering whether.
Comments by former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe. I'm told they're not connected. McCabe says he was fired because he opened an investigation into the president, not for lying to investigators about media leaks, which is what the Inspector General found. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge tells us what she's learned. Catherine.
Counting votes or possible votes.
The former acting FBI director told 60 Minutes the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein openly discussed how many cabinet members would support invoking the 25th Amendment to remove the president. But the FBI's former general counsel, James Baker, who met contemporaneously with McCabe and FBI lawyer Lisa Page about their conversations with Rosenstein, testified the effort went further. Quote, "I had the impression that the Deputy Attorney General had already discussed this with two members in the president's cabinet and that they were on board with this concept already." On Twitter, the president responded to McCabe on 60 Minutes, quote, "Wow, so many lies by now disgraced acting FBI Director Andrew McCabe. He and Rod Rosenstein look like they were planning a very illegal act." McCabe and others say the president's May 2017 firing of Director James Comey left the FBI and Justice Department in turmoil amid concern that the firing was designed to desync the Russia probe and obstruct justice.
The Deputy Attorney General offered to wear a wire into the White House. He said, "I never get searched when I go into the White House." I think the general counsel had a heart attack. And when he got up off the floor, he said, that's a bridge too far.
But Baker, who could face criminal penalties for lying to congressional investigators, testified, quote, "My recollection is that there were discussions about it over a longer period than the course of one meeting, a couple of days." McCabe said Rosenstein initially resisted a special counsel because the Deputy Attorney General worried he might lose his job. A senior department official told Fox Tonight the special counsel was appointed, quote, "to ensure that the Russia investigation was truly independent and without bias," something the official said that McCabe could not have accomplished. Shannon? All right, Catherine Herridge, thank you very much. Okay, with Rosenstein soon on the way out, will newly confirmed Attorney General Bill Barr investigate this alleged plot to use the 25th Amendment against President Trump? Joining us now, National Security Attorney Bradley Moss and Fox News contributor Jason Chaffetz, former chairman of the House Oversight Committee and author of The Deep State. Great to have both with us tonight, gentlemen.
Absolutely. How are you doing, Shannon?
Thanks, Shannon.
Very good. Okay, so I want to play something that Senator Elizabeth Warren said today about this issue of using the 25th Amendment. Here's what she said.
If they believe the president has a problem that triggers the 25th Amendment, then their loyalty is to the Constitution of the United States. It's that simple.
Okay, so Jason, if that's what they literally thought, that there was some legitimate threat to the U.S. or the Constitution, were they taking the right steps?
Well, there was no underlying evidence of that. There was no underlying evidence of the need for a Russia probe. There was no underlying evidence of anything in the 25th Amendment, if you believe what Mr. McCabe said to Scott Pelley on 60 Minutes. Now, remember, this person, Mr. McCabe, was fired, something that's rare for federal employees, for lying. He was on the subject of a February 2018 38-page report by the Inspector General about lying under oath 3 times, lying 4 times in total. So I don't think we can really believe anything that he says. I do think Mr. Baker, though, He does have a lot of credibility. But that's why Congress has to go, and my only hope is Lindsey Graham will yank him up here, because if he's not leaving, Mr. McCabe, if he's not leaving till mid-March, there's plenty of time to go testify before Lindsey Graham's committee.
Rosenstein, mid-March.
Yes.
McCabe's gone.
Rosenstein, yes,
we'll see.
absolutely.
And listen,
yes.
He's now chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Graham has said this is happening. They're going to get to the bottom of this and find out. In the meantime, Victor Davis Hanson, writing this article is called Autopsy of a Dead Coup. He says about this whole situation, in time, likely will become recognized as the greatest scandal in American political history, marking the first occasion in which U.S. government bureaucrats sought to overturn an election and to remove a sitting U.S. president. Bradley.
I'm trying not to roll my eyes too hard at this whole thing. Look, this is a once-in-a-generation problem these guys faced. They had a candidate where the investigation started during the campaign after George Papadopoulos starts running his mouth. The investigation's ongoing. The president's coming out. He's not giving up his tax returns. His finances are tied up at Deutsche Bank, which is getting raided all the time for being a conduit for Russian money laundering. He's saying there's no contacts with the Russians. His campaign, his senior officials, his campaign chairman is selling polling data to the Russian intelligence operatives. They're being told to coordinate with Roger Stone about WikiLeaks dumps. And then right after he fires James Comey, he goes and brags about it in the Oval Office to two senior Russian officials, including the ambassador who was part of all this drama. I'm not surprised these guys were freaked out. They didn't know what to think. They didn't know which end was up. So they thought of what could we do here? What options do we have? They talked about the 25th Amendment. They didn't go to the White House with armed FBI agents. They talked about going through the 25th Amendment to go to the cabinet, which would involve the vice president if anything happened. All these people selected by the president. This was not a coup. This was bureaucrats trying to figure out how to deal with an unprecedented situation.
Well, Jason, and there are people raising the point today that
I totally disagree with everything you just said.
Okay,
by
well,
the way,
just about everybody who's gotten in trouble as a basis of the Mueller investigation has been for lying to a federal agent, and yet we have a number of people here, including McCabe himself, as you mentioned, the IG report, who got in trouble for lying. A number of these people have had to quit or been dismissed from the FBI, and none of them are facing any charges for anything connected to lying to a federal investigator.
That's what's stunning about Mr. McCabe and why he's on a book tour and on 60 Minutes instead of facing prosecutors. I mean, it doesn't get any worse than this 38, 39-page report by the Inspector General detailing the 4 times that he lied, and yet he's not prosecuted. The Department of Justice has had this information for more than a year, and yet you look at Manafort, Stone, Papadopoulos. I'm not saying that they shouldn't be prosecuted, but if you're going to have equal justice under the law, they should be also going after the person that he was the acting director of the FBI for a time for lying.
Bradley, very quickly before we're out of time, but fair to say that the American people might feel better if they realized and felt there wasn't a double standard when it comes to prosecuting this lying stuff.
Of course. And let's be clear here. It wasn't lying. It was lack of candor. And I represent FBI officials all the time who get fired over that. There is a distinction in the law between lack of candor, which is a subjective, arbitrary term the FBI uses, and actually lying to the FBI or to government officials under 18 U.S.C. 1001.
Yeah, my parents, right before they spanked me, would have said that's not telling the truth. Yeah. Okay. Bradley and Jason, we'll leave it there.
Thank you.
I think it last
Thank you.
All right, is there a divide brewing between the far left and the even farther left? We're going to head out to the campaign trail where 2020 progressives are meeting constituents and selling the Green New Deal.
I am supporting the Green New Deal. We don't aspire. This is going to be a bad ending. It is very real, and it is within our power.
Plus, the latest on an Alabama woman who became an ISIS bride, reportedly encouraged Americans to kill themselves. And you won't believe, crisscrossing Iowa and New Hampshire today, it's becoming evident that the race to the left is on. Ellison Barber is tracking it out, and she's here to sort through what they are saying today. Hey.
Yes, hello, good to see you. So today is President's Day, and of course some people use President's Day to say happy birthday to our first president, George Washington. Some use it to say happy birthday to all of our presidents. Others just use it to stay home from work. But these 2020 hopefuls use the holiday weekend to hit the road and try to convince Americans in places like New Hampshire, Iowa, and California that their vision is the right one for America.
In the face of hatred and bigotry, we can bring love and healing. And this is that moral moment again in our country.
When you want to build a wall, when you want to divide a mother from her child, you are destroying the decency, the basic moral, common decency presidency that this country has always believed in, and that is wrong.
We do not pass gun safety laws because of fear of lobbyists, instead of understanding that our values should be about protecting our babies when they go to school.
We confront those problems together. I promise you our tomorrows will be better than our yesterdays.
At least 6 senators considering or running for president have publicly backed the Green New Deal, which hopes to make the U.S. carbon neutral by 2030. Critics say it is unrealistic and would cost way too much money. In New Hampshire today, Senator Cory Booker told Fox News he believes that argument is nonsense.
As a guy who's a former mayor, that shows you can actually revive your economy and create a bold green future. We environmentally retrofitted our buildings, saved taxpayers money, created jobs for our community, and lowered our carbon footprint. This lie that's being put out that somehow being green and responsible with the environment means you have to hurt the economy, a lie.
Senator Kamala Harris supports the Green New Deal, but talked about it in more aspirational terms, saying that it requires us to have goals. Some of them we will achieve and some we will not. Tonight, Senator Klobuchar said the same at a town hall in New Hampshire. Klobuchar says the debate is important and needs to start now, but she doesn't think everything in the Green New Deal can be achieved by 2030. Shannon?
Pretty ambitious. Okay, thank you very much. Good to see you. All right, with the Green New Deal taking center stage on the campaign trail, tonight we are starting a new series about this pitch for a policy intended to dramatically reshape America as you now know it. The Green New Deal got its start with self-described Democratic Socialist Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Massachusetts Democratic Senator Ed Markey. Correspondent Doug McElway brings us up to speed.
Never in our history have the interest of all Americans been so united.
If unity about climate change ever existed, within moments of the Green New Deal rollout, it tore apart. 2 days before this press conference, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez posted a Green New Deal FAQ segment on her website. Referencing the alleged 10 years that mankind has to save the Earth, the post said, quote, "We aren't sure that we'll be able to fully get rid of farting cows and airplanes that fast." It also promised, quote, "economic security for all unable or unwilling to work." A torrent of ridicule followed.
Well, if the Green New Deal took hold, I think our grid would stop.
It sounds like a high school term paper that got a low mark.
Within hours, Ocasio-Cortez's office deleted the FAQ from her website. The following Saturday, her chief of staff tweeted it was an early draft posted by mistake. The night before, an advisor to Ocasio-Cortez offered a different explanation.
No. She's actually tweeted it out to laugh at it. If you look at her latest tweets, it seems that apparently some Republicans have put it out there.
The Cornell professor was mistakenly referring to a parody of the FAQ tweeted by right-wing commentator Mark Dice. Dice inserted into the real document a guarantee for massage chairs and a call for American men to recycle urine. Mitch McConnell, well known for his disdain of show votes, announced a show vote.
See how they feel about the Green New Deal.
This cheap, cynical ploy evidently represents the sum total of Senate Republicans' leadership on the vital issue of climate change.
67 Democrats signed on to the Green New Deal, including many presidential candidates. Yet, stung by the ridicule, many tempered their support.
Why not have an aspirational goal?
Aspirational is a vague term for a vague, non-binding resolution. The rest of this week, we'll try to pin down the real costs and consequences of the Green New Deal. Shannon?
All right, Doug, thank you very much, and we'll bring you those pieces each night this week on Fox News at Night. Okay, it's progressive versus progressive. New York's progressive Democratic Mayor Bill de Blasio schooling freshman Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez over the canceled Amazon deal. She says the city promised the retailer $3 billion in tax incentives. Should have spent that money on other social programs, but that's not how it works.
That $3 billion would go back in tax incentives was only after we were getting the jobs.
And taking with it 25,000 potential jobs. Now even the far left is taking Ocasio-Cortez to task.
Here's the thing. I am a proud progressive, and what progressives need to do is show working people that we will get more for them.
Tonight's Power Panel, Rochelle Ritchie, former press secretary for the Democratic Policy and Communications Committee, Charlie Kirk, executive director and Turning Point USA, and David Harsanyi is senior editor at The Federalist. Thank you all for sticking around, and David, for joining our discussion. I'll start with you. De Blasio says they want to be able to communicate to America that you can be progressive and not kill jobs. Can they do it?
Apparently they can't do it.
the difference between, you know, populist socialism that sounds good and all of that, and the actual nuts and bolts of policy are very different. And AOC is more the real-life socialist than de Blasio, because she is actually practicing what she preaches, and it works this way. You can't embrace big companies. You can't give them any incentives for competition, and you can't bring them into Manhattan or anywhere else, or New York. So I actually think it can't work, and that's the rift that's happening in the Democratic Party right now.
Well, she certainly has become the star of the show for a lot of people, a star on social media, and young people being very attracted to her message. Rochelle, I want to play something that she has said now about the Berlin Wall.
No matter how you feel about the wall, you know, I think it's a moral abomination. I think it's like the Berlin Wall.
Well, Ed Morsi points out this. He says the Berlin Wall's moral abomination came from its intent to trap people inside a communist system when they wanted to flee, at which it largely succeeded for its 28-year lifespan. Only 5,000 crossed over into freedom during its 3-decade abomination. They didn't care a whit if anyone wanted to enter East Berlin. If nothing else, you'd think that a cheerleader for socialism would know to avoid references like this. And Rochelle, she thinks she's getting unfair treatment because there's such a media spotlight on her, but she is provocative.
Well, there's a media spotlight on her because of the things that she says and because of some of the very outlandish ideas that she has. I mean, she has this whole socialist idea, Medicare for all, education for all. Look, I definitely want people to be able to get the health care they need. I definitely want people to be able to get the education they need. But there has to be a fair process in order to make those things happen. This whole debacle that happened with Amazon, I live in Manhattan. And so it's really unfortunate for those people that live in Long Island City that had an opportunity to get a job. I'm not sure what she thought was degrading about an average salary of $150,000 a year. I mean, this is a woman who came from being a bartender, and now she's telling other people that an average salary of $150,000 a year is not good enough for you. She has done a lot of damage to people that wanted those jobs, the businesses that were planning for people to come and work there, the realtors that were refurbishing their brownstones to have people come and move in. And now all of a sudden it's just over, and Amazon is going to take their business elsewhere, and I'm sure any other city is going to be glad to have them in their city.
Well, and Charlie, we had new polling out just in the last few days about socialism, capitalism, and for the most part people rejected the idea of socialism in favor of capitalism. But the group that we saw, one of the biggest groups most interested in this, were young people. Here's what Rush Limbaugh has to say about why the attraction.
We've done a real disservice to our young people. You look at this new Green Deal and you look at the things that they think are true. They live in the greatest country ever. They have more opportunity for contentment, happiness, success than ever. And they think they live in a country that's unjust and immoral. They have been ill-educated, mal-educated, and it's really a shame.
Charlie, where's the disconnect? I mean, you're a youngster.
Yeah. Well, look, this is something I fight on college campuses every single day, and that our organization, Turning Point USA, is up against. And look, for years I've been trying to warn people that there will be an outward socialist under the age of 35 that will come to Congress, and that person will gain a lot of momentum. And I knew that because the college campuses are a harbinger of things to come. What she is saying is the exact dogma that is taught in our universities. America's a bad place, business is evil, redistributive policies are going to work, and socialism hasn't been tried. And it seems very radical to mainstream America, because it is, but this is the philosophy that is being taught in our universities. I like to call it is the campus has come to Congress, and the rest of America can decide if you really want this sort of ideology to be mainstream or continue to stay in our universities. I know for one, I'm going to fight as hard as I can to make sure our generation is not.
Make the Western Hemisphere a beacon of freedom as he vows a new day is coming for Venezuela and Latin America. Joining us now, Isaias Medina, former senior UN diplomat for Venezuela, and Brett Bruin was a diplomat during the Obama administration. Welcome to you both. Good to have you with us.
Good to be with you. Thank you so much, Anna, for having me. Appreciate it.
Isaias, I want to start with you. What did you make of the speech today? I mean, National Security Advisor, former Ambassador Bolton said it's not about the military, the U.S. military getting involved and forcing aid across the border, but the president keeps saying everything's on the table.
Absolutely. And I have to tell you, first of all, please allow me to thank President Trump and his team, not only for the immense humanitarian aid effort, for his continued support, but also, and most importantly, for bringing back hope to the Venezuelan people. And today, it was incredible. It was a final notice to allow the humanitarian aid to come in a very peaceful way. Otherwise, I believe that they will face the consequences. He was very clear to point out that all the options are still on the table.
Mm-hmm. And Brett, I know that you think there were some positives about the speech, but you had a concern as well that it seemed portions of it, at least, very much directed at the U.S. domestic audience and talking about the evils of socialism, you know, potentially as a rallying cry here in the U.S., not strictly to do with Venezuela.
Yeah, and this isn't a left or right issue. It's a right or wrong issue. I really firmly believe that both Democrats and Republicans should come behind a policy of strong action on Venezuela. Unfortunately, what the president said today in Miami, I don't think reached across the aisles. I don't think it reached across the political spectrum in Latin America or around the world. Remember, we still need the support of these countries to force Maduro from power.
Isaiah, what do you make of that?
No, I have to tell you that actually we have to work together. After resurrecting democracy, justice, and freedom in my country, to make sure that neither Venezuela or the American hemisphere will ever have Castro communism or 21st century socialism ever again. We need the people to be free to choose their governments. They need to be able to eat. What we're talking about here, Shannon, is tyranny versus democracy, is hunger and suffering versus hope. It is freedom and life versus death. And this is what we're fighting here. And we are in the gateway of the...
Video posted to Facebook, there shouldn't be a museum. Never forget it. Her dad, Brian, says the officer's generosity made his little girl cry and made her year. To that anonymous officer, you are already a hero, but tonight, you're also our midnight hero. Most watched, most trusted, most grateful you spent the evening with us. Good night from Washington. I'm Shannon Breen.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. TV star Jussie Smollett claimed to be the victim of a racist anti-gay attack at the hands of two Trump supporters. Virtually the entire news media and a parade of politicians immediately believed him and demanded the rest of us do so as well. Now that story is coming completely apart. According to police sources, Smollett actually orchestrated the entire attack himself. Elizabeth Wagmeister has been following this from the very beginning. She's a reporter at Variety and co-host of Page 6 TV, and she joins us tonight. Elizabeth?
Hi, Tucker. So reports are swirling that the alleged hate crime against Empire star Jussie Smollett was all a hoax, with the actor staging the attack on himself. Two arrests were made late last week, and the Chicago Police Department officially named two Nigerian brothers as official suspects, not just persons of interest, on Friday. Hours later, both of the suspects were released without any charges filed due to new evidence which cleared the two brothers. With the turn of events, the Chicago PD wants to re-question Smollett, but I spoke with his publicist, who told me today, quote, there are no plans for Jussie Smollett to meet with Chicago police today. Any news reports suggesting otherwise are inaccurate. The brothers, who were initial suspects, were both extras on Empire. They were actors, and reportedly they knew Smollett, who told police that he was attacked by two white men on January 29th, with the assailants reportedly yelling homophobic and racial slurs, pouring bleach on him, and putting a rope around his neck. While police entered the two suspects' home with a search warrant in Chicago, they found a black mask, bleach bottles, and a script from Empire. Smollett's music manager told us exclusively at Variety that he was on the phone with his client during the incident, and he heard the slurs, which included an alleged attacker yelling, quote, this is MAGA country. While police have not been able to confirm that Smollett was on the phone with his manager because he initially refused to turn over his cell phone, and then he ended up turning in heavily redacted phone records. Smollett is denying that the attack was staged, but reports have surfaced that he rehearsed the attack with the two Nigerian brothers and even paid them close to $4,000. The brothers fled for Nigeria the night of the attack, and they did not return into Chicago until the police picked them up at O'Hare Airport last week, and they began 2 days of questioning. Well, today, the two brothers spoke to a local Chicago affiliate, and this is what they said, quote, we are not racist, we are not homophobic, and we are not anti-Trump. We are born and raised in Chicago, and we are American citizens. Lawyers for Smollett are standing by their client's story, saying, quote, As a victim of a hate crime who has cooperated with the police investigation, Jussie Smollett is angered and devastated by recent reports that the perpetrators are individuals he is familiar with. He has now been further victimized by claims attributed to these alleged perpetrators that Jussie played a role in his own attack. Nothing is further from the truth, and anyone claiming otherwise is lying. That's from his lawyers.
Amazing story. Thanks very much for that update. Appreciate it. Almost 3,000 people were shot in the city of Chicago last year. Men, women, small children, sometimes alone, sometimes in groups. Many hundreds of them died. Not a single one of those people received anything like the attention the media have lavished on a relatively minor assault alleged by the television actor Jussie Smollett. On the other hand, none of Chicago's 3,000 shootings was even half as useful as Smollett's story. His story had everything. The national media long ago gave up the pretense of gathering news. Journalism is now explicitly a political job. The point of it is to enforce cultural orthodoxies and punish enemies. Jussie Smollett was the perfect vehicle for both of those things. Journalists pretended to be horrified as they recounted what he said happened to him, but secretly, they were thrilled.
There are many indications of a hate crime here. They are looking for two suspects who were apparently wearing Make America Great Again hats, though that has not yet been officially confirmed.
We don't know what happened to Jussie, but what we do know is that racism is alive and well in this country. There is real evidence of people who have done these crimes who cite that the president has inspired them.
The fact that they reportedly said this is MAGA country adds to sort of the atmosphere of menace that African Americans in particular and people of color in general have felt since the advent of the Trump administration.
And the media has really cast so much doubt on his story, which I find so personally offensive, that a gay black man is targeted and then suddenly he becomes the victim of people's disbelief. Why? It's so outrageous to me.
He said his attackers hurled racial and homophobic slurs at him. And this is America in 2019.
This is America in 2019. To the national media, Smollett's story was the perfect metaphor for the Trump era. It was also, pretty clearly, a total crock. Smollett's account began to fall apart within hours. After a series of leaks from the obviously skeptical Chicago Police Department, Smollett's handlers paired him with a network anchor they could rely on to launder the hoax. In the end, Smollett sat for 16.5 minutes with Robin Roberts of Good Morning America. Roberts surely knew there was ample evidence that Smollett was lying, but she decided to ignore that. Instead, Roberts colluded with him. She nodded empathetically as Smollett wept on camera. She asked no significant follow-up questions. The two parted like old friends. Both Smollett and Roberts turned out to be talented actors. Check out their performance on YouTube before it's scrubbed. You'll never watch ABC News again. Virtually every word they utter is dishonest. Smollett began by explaining that the men who attacked him were not muggers. They didn't want money. They assaulted him purely because of his identity as a gay black Democrat. People like Jussie Smollett aren't allowed to live in Donald Trump's America. That was the message of the attackers. This is MAGA country, they screamed. They were referring, of course, to Chicago, a city where 88% of the population voted against Donald Trump. As a crime story, it didn't make a lot of sense. And when skeptics on the internet raised basic questions about his story, Smollett attacked them as racist.
If I had said it was a Muslim or Mexican or someone black, I feel like the doubters would have supported me a lot more. And that says a lot about the place that we are in our country right now. The fact that we have these fear mongers, these people that are trying to separate us, and it's just not okay.
What you just heard is a near-perfect inversion of the truth. As Smollett himself might have put it, who exactly is the fear mongrel here? Who is dividing us? And who exactly is the victim in all of this? Well, Smollett claims that he's the victim. He tells us that he represents the most despised and unfashionable groups in America. That's why bigots doubt his story. The rest of us nod as if this were true because we're required to do that. That's how dishonest our society has become. Everyone must lie all the time. We know the rules. We have no choice. Meanwhile, our leaders immediately jumped to the defense of this supposedly unpopular person before even hearing the evidence. Within hours, at least 2 presidential candidates had described what happened to Smollett as a, quote, attempted lynching. They assumed on faith that he must be telling the truth. By definition, they smeared anyone who doubted him. They called him a hero. Is this the treatment that marginalized people receive? No, hardly. Smollett isn't powerless, far from it. His power lies in pretending that he has no power. In fact, Jussie Smollett and his promoters are the aggressors in this story. They launched a calculated campaign of slander against an entire group of people who have far less wealth and far less cultural influence than they have. If there's a bias crime here, they committed it. Will anyone be held accountable for this? Don't bet on it. In 1987, Al Sharpton introduced the media to a young woman called Tawana Brawley. Brawley had an awful story to tell. She said she'd been viciously raped by a group of racist white men and left in a garbage bag. She was covered in feces with racial slurs scrawled on her body. The Brawley case dominated headlines across the country for more than a year, and it bitterly divided New York City along ethnic lines. People hated each other because of what Tawana Brawley said happened to her. But it was all a lie. After conducting hundreds of interviews, a grand jury declared the entire story fraudulent. None of it actually happened. Brawley fled the state. A judge ordered Al Sharpton to pay for damages for accusing innocent men of rape. That should have been the end of Al Sharpton's career, yet just the opposite happened. Before he promoted Tawana Brawley's lies, Sharpton was best known as a small-time hustler, an FBI informant from Brooklyn, a man who'd once been James Brown's road manager. After he perpetuated the single most destructive racial hoax in memory, Al Sharpton got a promotion. He became a world-famous civil rights leader. He ran for president. He became a policy advisor to Barack Obama. According to visitor logs, Al Sharpton was invited to the Obama White House more than 80 times. He got his own show on MSNBC, which he still has. Sharpton has never apologized or even acknowledged the harm he did to this country by lying about Tawana Brawley. No one has forced him to. The lesson of Al Sharpton was clear to everyone watching. There are no penalties for hate hoaxes. There are only rewards. Not surprisingly, there have been many more since. The incident escalated dramatically after the 2016 election. The Muslim student in Louisiana who claimed she was assaulted by racists in Trump hats. The Muslim woman in San Diego who alleged the same. An anti-Asian attack in Minnesota, an anti-gay attack in California, a racial attack in Delaware, racist graffiti at the Air Force Academy, anti-Semitic threats phoned into Jewish community centers. All fake. Those and many, many more. The much-hyped epidemic of hate crimes you've heard so much about essentially is made up. The premise is absurd. America is not a hateful country. It's the most welcoming place on earth. That's why, even as our children learn from their teachers what a bigoted country this is, millions continue to stream in from Africa and Latin America for a better life here. It's why we've welcomed more refugees and immigrants than any nation in history. It's why we rescued a young Ilhan Omar from a refugee camp in Kenya. We are kind people. You see it in your own life. How many violent racists do you know personally? None, probably. That's because there aren't many in America. The left has to invent them. Stoking race hatred ensures continued power for the Democratic Party. Divided populations are easier to manipulate and rule. There would be no Democratic coalition without racial animosity. It's what holds their constituencies together. That's the point of identity politics. It's why they're forever reopening the wound. It's why Al Sharpton is still a revered figure among Democratic office holders. But the cost to the country has been high. Ask the kids from Covington Catholic. For the crime of having unfashionable political beliefs and skin color, a group of entirely innocent high school students came close to having their lives destroyed. That didn't happen by accident. The national media did it. They concocted a hate crime out of nothing. The Twitter mob then demanded that those boys be expelled from school and marked for life. Their parents were threatened. Their classmates were harassed. After 2 days, video surfaced proving that none of it was real. The mob moved on. But what if exculpatory?
And Comey gave the dossier to the president after he was elected, saying, you need to know about this. We can't prove any of it. We just want you to know. That's the same document they used to give to the court, swearing under oath, it was reliable. How do you square that?
Let me ask you, last question, breaking just now. The announcement of Rosenstein's replacement could come as early as this week. Trump administration official tells Fox News the Attorney General Bill Barr has picked Jeffrey Rosen as his deputy AG. Quick reaction. We got to go.
I don't know if it's true, but that would be a good pick, and this investigation is just beginning. We'll get to the bottom of it, I promise.
Senator, you and the Attorney General, if we're going to have equal justice under the law, if we're going to have equal application, and we're going to have a Constitution, you guys need to get to the bottom of this. A big responsibility on both your shoulders. All right, coming up.